materially possible, spiritual support. Material is the one that always ends up mattering most, sort of pulling off, free meals for people and that kind of thing. First of all, the cost dean, the College of Social Sciences dean, Frank Harold, has been a huge supporter of us materially for the last 2 years. Without his help, we simply could not have done any of our events that we've done over the last 2 years. The provost of the university, Devinda Malhotra, has also been very helpful, very supportive of us, as has the associate dean of graduate studies here, Dan Gregory, and also we've gotten the contributions from associate provost of undergraduate studies, excuse me, Tracy Orr, and it seems like there's somebody else I'm supposed to be mentioning as well. Oh, okay. Well, in any event, we've also had very generous donations from our co-sponsors, not least of which, of course, is the Immigration History Research Center of the University of Minnesota, and the director of that research center, who just happens to be our keynote speaker today, Donna Gabaccia, here. Also, the United Way of Central Minnesota has also supported this endeavor with a generous donation, and they are also our other co-sponsor, and we're honored to have their participation and co-sponsorship for these events. Is there any, I think of anybody else? I think I've gotten everybody. I hope I did. In any event, and of course your being here is of course a huge part of the reason why our organization, our research group is successful. Without your participation, we really couldn't say that we're accomplishing very much, are we? But we are, and this is evidence of it, so thank you very much. Today's speaker is Donna Gabaccia, the director of the Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota. I met Donna Gabaccia through one of our esteemed colleagues, Mary Wingard, the renowned and prolific author and historian of immigrant history in Minnesota. She's on sabbatical this semester, so she is not with us. She's busy at home trying to finally do some work, but she regrets not being here, but she wishes all well. In any event, Mary introduced me to Donna. Actually, Mary suggested I contact Donna, and I befriended Donna on Facebook. And we are not just friends, we are Facebook friends. And we Facebook like each other. In any event, in addition to being Facebook friends, we have a lot of common interests, not least of which is, well, to begin with, before I forget this, Donna is an established, very renowned international immigration studies researcher and writer. She's written books, written many, many articles. She directs, again, that research center, which does wonderful work there, bridging the University of Minnesota campus with the immigrant community, and immigrant communities, I should say, of Minnesota and outside of Minnesota. As I said, she's published, in fact, recently she just published a book. What was the title of the book? Wasn't it on Italian immigrants? Intimacy and Italy, diaspora, and something like that. Just a book. Just another book. But in any event, last year we met at a little cafe in Minneapolis, myself, Mary, and Donna, and we were talking about our mutual interest in terms of, developing understanding of immigrant communities and the issues that they're faced with, and also, to one extent or another, the way in which we as academics can, as it were, express and show our solidarity with them in concrete and practical ways beyond simply, saying that we support them and the like. In the course of that conversation, I mentioned our upcoming conference. We just finished our last year's conference on immigrant workers in Minnesota, the Global Goals Local Conference, and I asked her if she would be interested in participating in our conference next year. And and this is very unusual, before I even, as a matter of fact, I actually was kind of shy about even suggesting the matter. She just threw out, would you like a donation for the conference, and then suggested a very generous figure, which I also dared not, reach. And there you are. We have the honor of being now able to say that this conference is one that is being put on by two different organizations, research groups, and hopefully will be a research center in the future at the University of Minnesota and St. Cloud State University. Donna is a person who really is very eloquent in her discussions of questions of immigration and the issues that immigrants face here in Minnesota and worldwide. Again, she's an international immigration scholar, she likes to remind me. Today she's going to be discussing the question of class and the role of class in immigrant issues and immigration historically and here in Minnesota. I think she's perfectly poised to do this, and I'm sure I'm just looking forward to this lecture. And again, so it's my honor to welcome Donna Gabaccia.
Thank you, Stephen. It's really a pleasure to be here in St. Cloud. My topic, as you can see in back of me, is workers at the border, class, and in American immigration policy. I want to thank Stephen and his research group for making a space for an historian on this program, where our focus has been largely and rightfully on the present. Despite my interest in the past, you're actually going to hear in my talk today themes that have emerged in many of the earlier presentations. The present, after all, emerges from the past, as my talk, I hope, will make obvious. So let's see if I can make this work. Page down, maybe. Okay, all right. It's actually discouraging to spend much time thinking about today's border, about the plight of workers seeking to cross that border, and about the detention and deportation of thousands of immigrant workers whose main crime has been to work, and often to work very hard, even as they are unable to gain an immigration status that gives them permission to labor here. As a result, I think it's easy today to draw an overly sharp contrast between the immigration policies of the past and the immigration policies of the present. In the past, or so we usually learn at school, the gate to America was wide open, and in the past, the immigrant worker was welcomed as a builder of America. Today, by contrast, we tend to see the gate being replaced, as you can see up here, by fences, and the welcome has turned to hostility and contempt for immigrant workers who are now just as often labeled as criminals, invaders, terrorists, or drains on the country's wealth, rather than as workers and builders of the American economy. So in part, as an historian, I feel compelled to answer the question, how has the United States come to this impasse? How has a country that celebrates the hardworking immigrants of the past and makes them upwardly mobile symbols of a great, successful, and hardworking American nation of immigrants become a country that actually demonizes and daily deports hardworking immigrants? How has the U.S. become a country that forces immigrant workers into illegality through immigration laws, as you've heard repeated at times here at this conference? This country only has 5,000 visas a year to give to blue-collar workers. How has the United States effectively eliminated the line in which those workers are supposed to patiently wait for green cards and legality? Now, for many understandable reasons, and especially I think in scholarly discourse, there's a tendency to attribute this change in public opinion towards immigrants to the powerful and deeply seated legacy of American racism. If we acknowledge the power of American racism, it does make a certain kind of sense to observe that hatred of workers, immigrant workers, has escalated as brown and yellow and black-skinned workers with origins in Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia have replaced earlier workers from Europe who arrived in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, my purpose here today is not to try to deny the grimness of our contemporary immigration policies or to deny the salience of race for either U.S. immigration policy or for the daily enforcement of those immigration policies. The situation is a grim one, and the power of race to shape American behavior towards immigrants has not diminished much with the creation, over the last 45 years, of supposedly race-neutral immigration laws. Still, the story that I want to tell you today is not a story about the injustices of racism alone, but a story in which class figures importantly at every twist and every turn in history. My goal for the next 30 minutes or so is to present you with a different immigration history than the one you may have learned at school, or that you hear, actually, in popular decisions and that you hear in popular discussions of immigration policy. By looking at the past in a new way and through the lens of class, I want to convince you that the past was not a golden age for immigrants or for immigrant workers. Today's policies are not the reversal of a generous and welcoming tradition, but rather the latest expression of a very long and too little understood American history of hostility towards working men and women, a hostility that does tend to racialize all men and women who do manual labor or who earn low incomes. In short, I want to argue that U.S. immigration laws have actually never looked particularly kindly at foreign-born workers, that Americans have always worried about how to control foreign workers, and worse, that Americans have almost always assumed that the presence of immigrant workers has harmed them and the country as a whole. Our immigration policies, in other words, for a very long time, have reflected the same kinds of assumptions and fears. We're just living with the current iteration of a long-standing pattern. The task for immigration reformers then, as I see it, is not to look backwards towards a general, generous, and honorable past, or to try to retrieve the sentiments, the positive sentiments and values that might help us to solve our policy problems today, nor is it the task of reformers to insist that Americans somehow return to our older virtues that allowed us to welcome the immigrants of the past. I hope that I can convince those of you who want a just and fair immigration policy that the answer does not, in fact, lie in a return to the policies of the past. On the contrary, I want to try to convince you that past policies are the origins of today's problems. And that's why we need to understand, historically, immigration history and the U.S. immigration policy. So, in order to tackle the long and rather complex history of U.S. immigration policies and the way in which class has shaped those policies, I want to focus on a number of commonly held and entwined myths about the immigration policies of the past. And to keep my talk manageable, I'm going to focus on just 5 of them. The first is what I'll call the myth of unregulated migration. The second myth points to our confused thinking about immigrant exclusions based on race. The third set of myths emerges from our assumption that the United States has always prided itself on being a nation of immigrants, and that therefore in the past at least it welcomed immigrants. The fourth myth is about the 1965 immigration law, the law that is the foundation still for today's policies. And the fifth myth is one that suggests that that law's preferences for families makes it impossible for the United States to admit large enough numbers of workers, thus differentiating the praiseworthy laboring immigrants of the past from more recent arrivals who are stigmatized instead as drains and dependent on the country's wealth. Now, to understand the myths that I'm going to explore, I need to begin with a few words about the constitutional foundations of U.S. immigration policy. I don't know, how many of you read the Constitution lately? Actually, it's gotten kind of popular among conservative Republicans to carry it around with them. If you've read the Constitution recently, and I have, you will see it actually has precious little to say about either immigrants or immigration. At most, what you'll find there are a couple of indirect references to aliens, to, and I quote, certain migrations of certain people, and to foreigners as naturalized citizens. First of all, the Constitution very clearly establishes that foreigners can become citizens of the United States, and that's not a provision that's available everywhere in the world. It's worth focusing on. And they can become citizens through a process that is called naturalization. the Constitution itself empowered Congress to create rules governing naturalization. Second, the Constitution prohibited Congress, at least before 1808, from prohibiting what it